Heather, do you want to start with the meeting protocols?
Sure. Share. Sorry about that. Right. Gosh, it would not be an EAB meeting without me fumbling with the computer. Welcome, everybody, to the January EAB meeting. The city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, excuse me, for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff and board and commission members, as well as democracy for people of all ages and identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement process, please visit that website seen on your screen. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited. Participants are required to sign up to speak using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. Because we do not have registration for open and public comment tonight, you can indicate you would like to participate by using the raise hand function. The raise hand button is in the participant box, which can be found in the menu by hovering over the top or the bottom of your screen and then clicking on the participant icon. When the box opens, you will see the raise hand button at the bottom. By clicking on that button, you can indicate you would like to participate in open or public comment. If you have joined us by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. Looks like we have no participants.
Right. Thank you, Heather. Next, I think we can go to approve our minutes from the last meeting. Go for a second, and then all in favor. And 1, 2, 3. And abstention. All right. Moving on to our meeting items. Do we want to start with the presentation?
We will, thanks, Chairperson. I just wanted to acknowledge that I don't know if you saw the note from Annie that she may pop on. She's traveling, she is in India, so that may or may not.
The time difference is a little bit.
It was a little rough.
Yeah.
It's a little rough. So I just wanted to make sure that that was on the record. I don't need to tee this up. I think I'll look over to Carolyn Elam to tee this item up, except to say that this is part of a series of conversations that we've been having with the board on this particular topic. Really wanted to get this in front of you so we have a regular cadence of updates. That way, if you have suggestions, feedback, or particular questions as we move this forward, we're acknowledging those as we go. So Carolyn, I'll let you take it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be quite brief. But you'll recall that I came and talked to you a couple of times last year around building related decarbonization, one being our building code update. So we are now on the 2024 City of Boulder Energy Conservation Code. So excited to see that move forward. And then our team here joined you for a meeting in the spring to talk about our new project to update our overall roadmap for how we will work towards decarbonizing all of our buildings. So not just those that fall under our construction codes, but how we address the magnitude of buildings that we have, the breadth of the buildings we have that exist today. And so I think at that time, we gave you kind of an overview of the project. We'll refresh you on kind of the scope of the project when Laurel starts the presentation. We've since hired our consulting teams, gotten some of the initial analysis from them in terms of the policy landscape and some of the opportunities, and we're about to kickstart or really dive into our community engagement. And so that's why we really wanted to come here and have an opportunity to check in with you to let you know, what we're envisioning as far as engagement, to inform this roadmap process and what comes next, and get your feedback and before we launch that, and also make sure you're able to help us help community members provide their feedback into our roadmap effort so that you're aware of what's going on. And then we'll be coming back. We have a scheduled council study session at the end of May, so we're targeting coming back at the beginning of May to you all to share the results of the engagement and what we plan to share with city council as far as the roadmap at that time. So this is kind of the get feedback into the engagement portion of it, but I will hand that over to my amazing team. You guys want to start by introduce yourself again? I'm Caroline, I'm a senior manager in our department. I realized I failed that task. Laurel, you want to introduce yourself first, and then Crystal, and then you can start the presentation.
Sure, I am Laurel Matry, and I work on the energy team and climate initiatives. I focus primarily on building efficiency, electrification, air quality.
And I'm Crystal Wander. And my title is Energy Equity Policy Advisor. And I guess, I mean, primarily that means I am focused on kind of making sure that we're incorporating equity considerations in all of our work. Just kind of do a lot of, well, you can see we've got our titles here related to this project. So Caroline's our project sponsor. We've got Laurel and the analysis lead and engagement lead.
All right, so first up, we wanted to say that the official name for the roadmap is Healthy Buildings Stronger Community Roadmap, but this was formerly known as the Healthy Resilient Fossil Fuel Free Buildings Roadmap, which is what we had presented to you on previously. That's just, is it the arrow? This one.
They lobbied for something shorter.
Yeah.
Got your.
So here's just an overview of what we're going to talk about. I'm not going to go through every single thing, but just to kind of give you like an idea of kind of the flow of our presentation. Generally, our effort to develop a roadmap falls inside of the greenhouse gas emission targets, emission reduction targets that we have as a department and as a city. Right now, our big question is how do we get to net zero by 2035? So that's kind of the scope of the roadmap timeline right now. But just as a reminder, and then another thing I think that's important in this slide is that electricity as a source of energy is 100% renewable. So thus the focus on reduction of the use of natural gas in our buildings.
The assumption is that in that timeline.
Yes.
It's not today.
In this
So by
timeline.
2030, correct?
Yeah. So I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so why buildings? Why are we focusing on them? Why are they important? If we look at our emissions by sector, buildings are by far and large the kind of highest producers of greenhouse gas emissions. In particular, commercial really stands out, but residential as well. So that's what we're focusing on in this roadmap. That's not to say that we're not focusing on resilience. That's also a piece of what we're focusing on, and equity. So I think those three, emissions reduction is a big piece, but also, and this, I'll talk about this in the next slide. So, or 2 slides down. A little bit of background. 2/3 of our approximately 47,000 residential units, 3,700 commercial buildings produce our community's emissions. Buildings last 50 years. So we are looking at a lot of modification, upgrade, trying to convince people or
Make them.
or give them great incentives or programs to update an asset that they're going to be holding on to for a long time. And then just as another piece, we are definitely focusing on indoor air quality. People spend 90% of their time indoors, with extremes in climates in terms of heat and cold. We want to make sure that we're thinking about what we're doing when we're sealing up envelopes of buildings is, essentially like recirculating more air indoors. So that's on our minds as well when we are looking at what our roadmap is. Yes, sir.
So you say 2/3, what about the other third?
That's,
Is
that's
it-
actually, I think I edited this.
Yeah.
That is an error.
Well, no, if you go back to slide,
2/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions.
Yes.
Are from buildings.
Yes.
Yes, sorry, that is
The
my,
pricing is.
I'm gonna.
Okay, I thought like 1/3 was at zero already. or
Yeah.
something. Okay, okay.
Yes.
We will edit that,
Sorry.
yeah,
Yeah,
because that
sorry
was not
about
the
that.
case, but 2/3.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Um,
own that one right there.
Yeah.
buildings are responsible for 2/3 of our.
Okay.
greenhouse
Yeah.
gas.
Mhm.
63%. Previous.
It keeps going down thanks to electricity
Okay.
and greening of electricity.
Just to note too, that 63% is based on our 2023 greenhouse gas inventory. And so it's a good proxy for 2024, but we don't have this number yet.
Mhm.
And that's like emissions, just like will be like heating and all that.
Yeah, I mean, it's predominantly space and water conditioning
Uh-huh.
is the largest single use of energy, but it also includes other applications. Because we just quantify the total electricity consumption and the total natural gas consumption, so you're also gonna see in there process loads or things like that from our industrial sector, particularly on well, actually, both sides are pretty intensive, so.
Mhm.
And just so you know, we were actually trying to test you to see if you're paying attention.
Good job.
It's-
So generally, the vision for the roadmap, and I kind of hinted at this, is that we want to support meeting our net zero emissions goal by 2035. We want to increase the building stock resilience to future climate impacts, improve indoor air quality, address racial equity and other equity considerations, advance social resilience with affordable solutions, and then stabilize energy costs to the degree that we can as climate extremes increase. So here has been the approach to the roadmap. We started with kind of the technical piece on the front end. We brought in ARUP, we did put it on RFP, chose ARUP as our consultant. And had them update our building stock analysis so that we know all the different types of buildings we have, what's all the information we have about those buildings. Do we know what kind of HVAC systems they have? What kind of upgrades have been done? What might be standard systems that exist in those types of buildings, so that we could gather all the types of information that we would need, so that we would know from point A, which is this building stock analysis, what do we need to do in a roadmap to get to point B, which is, our emissions reduction goals, but also the other pieces of the visions that I just laid out.
Is that for city-owned buildings or all?
It's all,
Okay.
Yeah. We also did a policy and program scan and analysis where we had our consultants look at not only our own programs, policies from past and present, but then go out across the country to see what's out there that people are doing that, would be feasible for Boulder, both at the city and state level. And then we're having them work on a financial analysis so that we can learn what are the tools that are out there that we can use to pay for all this, essentially.
yeah, what is the financial need, by way of example.
Yeah.
We know, well over 70% of our buildings currently rely on gas for space heating. And if we want to get to our net zero goal, we need to transition all those. And we've, done the back of envelope analysis in the past of, what it costs to retrofit a, residential home. We've done some baselining of like what it takes to do some commercial. This is to create the whole picture of, here's I don't remember, they haven't gotten us the number yet, but let's just say it's the $600 million cost or the $1 billion cost that needs to be invested. Then we look at, what incentives are out there, what financing tools are out there, what tax credit programs are out there, what's the normal investment that would happen over that time that buildings would have to make anyway in system replacement, and then what's left and what's that gap. So that we can then have a conversation around what we as a city from programs and policies wanted you to, recognizing the magnitude of that investment need, what do we want to do in terms of offering financial support or other tools?
So then next part of the approach is community engagement. Crystal's gonna talk more about that. We are currently just at the beginning of that process. And then eventually we take that technical analysis, all the information we've collected. We take all the input and feedback from the community engagement process, and we synthesize that into the roadmap, recommendations and suggestions, and put that out as a draft and get y'all's feedback and hopefully finalize that and then start to actually implement our plan.
And yeah, I'll just call out that Trestle Strategy Group and Institute for the Built Environment are our consultants on that piece.
On the engagement. Yeah, and this will again lay out the prioritized list of things that we would then start to further advance. So let's just, and Laurel can talk about some of the examples.
We're just
but,
about to.
yeah, but so for example, if we get, very positive, positive feedback around some of these, and we know that they could have big impact, something like a building performance standard by way of example, then that will inform further development, further engagement, and then we would take that back to council as a new ordinance or update. So that's mechanically what that would look like.
Yeah, so having done the policy program scan, from our own kind of knowledge of history and kind of what we have done already in Boulder County, the state, we've put together, this is kind of what has risen to the surface in terms of what potentially is possible in Boulder. And some of this already exists, some doesn't. So this is the kind of ideas that we're going to bring to the community engagement process to get feedback on and kind of get more insight into. Just to pull out a couple, we've talked about building performance standards, that is like setting standards or targets on the emissions from a building or energy use from a building, and state of Colorado and Denver and Fort Collins and Aspen are already well on the way to doing this, but some other things potentially end of life replacement. So when a furnace runs out, we might require someone to replace it with an electric with a heat pump. So just to kind of give you some point of sale upgrades is another thing that we found interesting in California. They actually when a home goes up for sale, there's certain efficiency upgrades they have to make in order to sell the home. And so that's kind of an area where we don't have a lot of, I'd say, like teeth, to implement change right now, is in our non landlord operated buildings where, it's just a regular you and me who buy a home. How do we impact that community? So that's something we might consider there, depending on the feedback we get. And then on this list, there's also, equity priority buildings is something we're actually going to establish a specific program to support equity priority buildings and moving through some of our requirements. And we actually have received $4.5 million from the Department of Energy to set this program up. So that'll definitely be a part of whatever we do. But anyway, this is kind of where we landed in terms of the types of things that we're going to be discussing and putting forth to our community. And then ultimately, in the end, selecting kind of what's going to make the draft roadmap.
Yeah, and one thing I will say about this list, Laurel, if you want to stay on it,
I'll go
is
back.
what you're going to see is a blend of things here. Like some of them are like regulatory strategies, like end of life replacement or time of sale requirements, and then some are supporting programs and policies. So, for example, wraparound services, like it's how you set up for success. So as you're looking at that list, there's a blend of those on there. So we're looking at, how you enable, how you support equity principles, in addition to like, what's the policy requirement that you may impose. And, and some of these, continue with things like we already have today, such as, incentive programs, advisory support, that's some of our wraparound services we have today, but there's going to be nuances that we've gleaned that can help improve upon what we have today. So that's why you're kind of seeing a blend of things that may not all look like they're equal to each other in terms of policy.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, two big ones that our buildings need a lot of support with is the technical assistance and the funding and financing support, like not necessarily like, here's the funding, but how do I even figure out how to fund or what's out there for me? Is there some sort of guide, someone who could guide me through how to figure out how to finance a project or to use the incentives that are out there? That's one big one that I know, we've been looking at and other cities and communities are adding. And then another is that technical assistance. It's like, okay, I'm a property manager that's like kind of barely getting by, with your BPO requirements. And now you want me to do a full building analysis, figure out how to get it from point A to point B in terms of emissions reductions. I'm gonna need some support in like technically how to understand that and get from point A to point B. So just wanted to point that out. Anything else on this?
All right.
I will. There we go.
So I'm gonna take over here, and now I'm gonna give you guys whiplash and bring you out of this whole topic of, what potentially are we considering for the roadmap? And back out to, 10,000 feet to our, like, kind of how our city looks at what the agreements we have on how we look at projects and what we have to consider as we go into engagement. So this is the engagement spectrum that is in our engagement strategic framework. And so there's like inform, consult, involve, collaborate. And because this is really a roadmap and we're not actually designing projects right now, really a lot of what we're doing is I think our commitments are really on that inform to consult end of things. As there are specific programs that get rolled out, involve and collaborate might, depending on what, especially the equity ones, they'll be definitely more involved and consult. And so, I think our commitment to the community and to our stakeholders is really like keep people informed as we're doing this, developing the roadmap. Listening to and acknowledging concerns and aspirations is part of that commitment. Share feedback on how the public input has actually had input on the decision, influenced it. And then just ensuring that we are getting feedback from the right voices, right? Because there's a lot of different stakeholders that work in buildings, live in buildings, own buildings. And then the other piece that kind of was suggested by our consultants, which is what we're doing, is empower. So making sure that like as we're doing this touch point, where we're having interviews with people or doing these focus groups, we're actually, making sure that, they're learning about what already exists, that's a potential resource that can support them. And then what might be coming down the pike. So there's actually these talking point sheets that we go through so that we're very transparent about like, just consistently communicating about what all the potential programs are. So people have the opportunity to learn and weigh in, and then the incentives and programs. All right, next slide, please. Thank you.
What is it, pike or pipe?
I said down the pike, but I don't know. Is it pipe?
I don't know. I just always said down
It's
the
the
pipe.
it's the turnpike and the pipe line.
Because I've always heard, down the pipe. Interesting. It just caught me off guard, sorry.
No, that's okay.
No worries, I think it's the turnpike reference.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I figured out where it came from, but it caught me off guard.
That's, yeah. And they probably both work, right?
Yeah, I mean, makes sense.
So this is again, is kind of an overlay of our healthy buildings, stronger community roadmap process with this thing called the engagement wheel. So you've probably, kind of are familiar with this as well. So there's the 9 steps to engagement. The first step is defining the issues. And when we visited you back in April, that's what we kind of talked about, is these are the issues. We just kind of re-hit on that lightly again. We did a lot of stakeholder mapping to really make sure that we're thinking about everybody who in some way has a stake that they hold in this space. And then where we're at tonight with you all is we have our draft plan has been produced. This is your opportunity to provide input. And then we're gonna we're gonna get together one last time about 2 weeks from now to finalize our engagement plan, as we get ready to kind of launch into engagement.
And then release the hounds.
Yeah, release the hounds, and then all the work that ARUP, has, under Laurel's charge. All of the work they've been doing is gonna be that shared foundation of inquiry, in addition to really having a good, robust explanation of what it is that already exists here, like what we've done in the past, what we've tried, what's failed, where we're at today, so people understand that. And then I think the next kind of step that's worth pointing out is step 7, make a decision. That's the city council meeting on May 22nd. And then step 8, communicate decision and rationale. That's when it actually gets published. And then it'd be shared with the broader community and with stakeholders. And then there's after 8, you implement, and then you just circle back. So it's like an iterative process. And then from there, it's gonna each of these strategies that come out of it are gonna have their own trip around the wheel, right?
When do you think that implement is?
It's gonna begin this year.
Yeah.
Because I think, so May is we hit council. I think it'll be, in my experience from other projects, I feel like it shouldn't take more than 3 weeks to go, because we should have a pretty clear sense. And they provide input, and then we may make some adjustments and clean it up, and then it's ready to go. Unless there's some fatal flaw that I'm not predicting, But it's just a study session, which is different than an agenda item.
Right.
So that's kind of a
Yeah,
difference.
it's not a formally adopted policy per se, but we want to make sure that we're using the opportunity, because you can envision, one obvious thing that we're going to need to do no matter what is make updates to our current building performance ordinance. Because we have a state program out there now that affects some of our buildings. We have things that we've learned. So we're likely going to be rapidly coming back to council with some revisions to that. So part of the study session is, to make sure that they can understand within our roadmap where that update sits and what to expect from it. So we've laid that groundwork with them as well for the next steps of implementation.
Thank you. All right, do you mind shifting to the next slide, please? All right, so this is the timeline. And we're actually, if you look on this timeline, we're in the, I'm gonna call it hunter green. I don't know, that's not quite the right color, but it's Q1. So we're about ready to head into that engagement phase, and what the other stuff is behind us. And then specifically what that's gonna look like is, we actually back in December, you'll notice, right above that, it says 10 initial interviews, and the purpose of those, and I'll share a little bit about kind of our, the themes in a slide that's coming up, but we did that to be better prepared to do meaningful focus groups. And then in February is going to be really when we're kind of hitting the pavement, and over the course of the month, we're going to have all 20 of those focus groups, and then simultaneously as staff, we're going to be talking to the departments, the various of our, kind of allied departments, and having different conversations about, the different ways that we touch those other departments.
Yeah, they're part of our internal engagement is part of the engagement plan.
Yeah, and then the one other thing is we will have a broad community-wide questionnaire. And I'm just looking draft. So yeah, then I think the rest of it's pretty self-explanatory. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I would say here, Crystal, is I think we started the framing of this presentation a little bit about hitting our emissions reduction goals, but I think we've certainly were hyper focused on emissions reductions over the years and with our past policies, and as we really center our goals and strategies more soundly in resilience and equity. And I think we talked about this last spring when we were here, acknowledging that the energy needs of our community are changing and evolving as, we have increased weather extremes, rising temperatures, cooling access is important. You know, so I think one thing to think about as we do this engagement, I think we're trying to make our conversation with the community a little bit more focused around those other values than just the traditional emissions reduction component, because that's really what these strategies are centered around as well. Like, I think Crystal or Laurel spoke to, you know, stabilization of utility costs, right? So as we know that people have increasing demands for cooling and weather extremes, you know, we know the vulnerabilities of like fluctuating natural gas price is challenging. We know that we can help stabilize costs if we have solar with folks. So it's really thinking about that holistic delivery. And so I think that's going to be really core to how we engage with the community broadly and talk to things that we know will be a little bit more connectable and urgent and concerning to folks, right? I saw a lot of head nodding, you know, when we were talking about how much time people spend in buildings and air quality. You know, those are the things we're really going to talk to and talk about and really try and make sure that people are understanding the connection, that this isn't just emissions reduction for the sake of emissions reduction. It's really making our buildings healthy and resilient. And we get the benefit of emissions reduction as a result. And really just trying to sophisticate the conversation we're having with the community about that.
I think there's an additional objective too, and I really appreciated the presentation and how the team is kind of thinking about this more holistically. And I want to kind of reference back to the discussion that we had with the board last year around the update to the energy code. And at that time, I think we were talking to you about how we're using kind of that regulatory framework. We have the energy code, we have the building code, we have multiple regulatory components. But how do you create that umbrella across those that really help us zero in on the values that we're trying to create and the outcome that we're trying to create with this, with our buildings overall? And so, of course, if you just look at a building code, it's, you know, there are certain requirements and outcomes, but as we think about how to address issues related to climate and resilience and other important community values, that's really what this represents. And so I want to just acknowledge and really amplify the point. This is not a departmental effort. This is a citywide effort to try to bring the various parts and pieces together so we have a really good vision moving forward. So we'll be working very closely, obviously, with our internal partners, planning being a major one, to understand how this really fits in and nests and really creates some synergy around the work that they're doing. And that includes a lot of the updates that are currently underway. And so we'll talk about later in the calendar look ahead. There is some council conversation with respect to building code. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of discussion in 2025 around the comp plan. So just trying to keep a sharp eye on how these things all fit together. And this roadmap is going to be really, really valuable.
So I think you're going to dive into the specifics now.
One more.
No, but this is gonna be like,
Light touch.
yeah, I think the intent of this is just to give you guys like a little window into what we've heard so far. Cause like I imagine if I was sitting in your chairs, like I would be kind of very curious. So I was like, hey, let's just put it together. So just understand that this is like a high level broad brush, like just looking for me, not doing any kind of technical analysis, just like looking at the words that came up a lot. But these were like the ways that our consultant categorized what they were hearing was like they heard, you know, was the codes and regulations category, the efficiency and electrification, financial considerations, green infrastructure. There was a whole category called student housing concerns and then landlord tenant dynamics. And so some of the themes that were coming out were increased ease or reduced complexity. Like, how do you make it easier for us? Money, who pays and how? I think I actually have that kind of coming up twice.
Which came up more than twice.
Yeah, like reflective of the conversations. But that was, yeah. Regulatory fatigue, it was kind of like stated a couple of ways, but like regulatory fatigue and avoiding compliance, like that some people will actually just, I guess, buy out of our current like BPO because they just are frightened of dealing with getting a permit, you know, like so that's kind of part of what we were hearing. And then people were saying like, hey, is there a way you can incentivize us? Santa Monica has a great program. We were also hearing, that there's other things that are just happening in this world of ours that feels like it's like ratcheting down and intensifying, like, you know, like there is, you know, I know the landlord tenant space has like, for example, there's been additional regulation on landlords, so they're feeling that they're having to navigate that, but then there's also people saying that their fire insurance costs are so high, like just the cost to do business here is getting more expensive. And then this is where I think it's kind of stated twice, like and there may be a nuanced difference is like, who is responsible? Like, is it really should the public, be responsible, or these private businesses for these upgrades? Is it the home buyer or the home seller? Like, if it's an point of sale, if that's what we're talking about as a policy, who should have to do the upgrade? Is it the building owner or the commercial tenant? So these are just like some of those types of issues that were raised. And then people are requesting assistance with planning. So help us plan to replace equipment. Because they're saying like, if we could just, you know ahead of time what we need to do when the furnace fails, then it's easier for us because we have a plan in place, you know. So that was one idea that came out, for example. Small, and then just the general theme of the smaller the business, the more you're going to struggle to come into compliance. Growing interest in net zero was another one. Like a lot of like younger home buyers seem to when they're on the market are valuing those kind of more net zero type amenities in homes. Basic health and safety was another theme that came up, like in some buildings. This came up in the student housing conversation, that some of the buildings just are just fundamentally like lagging and not, you know, let's forget about electrifying. Let's just get these up to like basic health and safety. And then you know, just saying like maybe one of the things we can do to make this go well is to communicate the benefits. So those are just some examples. There's more that I'm not saying.
Yeah, and process wise, so Crystal, maybe talk a little bit about like how the engagement process is structured, right? So this is the start with the targeted interviews. Yeah. And so we had our consultants speak with, remind me of kind of like who the stakeholders were. So like we had Farha, so so we had like the Rental Housing Association was one of the stakeholder groups that we first heard from, like their board. So we intentionally sought certain voices because we wanted to make sure we heard from like student housing folks that topic had come up. We wanted to hear from small businesses, so we heard from them. We talked to somebody from PACE, one of our partner organization. We
definitely wanted to
a
talk
couple
to
of property managers.
commercial building
Yeah.
owners, tenants.
And the idea here is to do those targeted stakeholders and then use that feedback to then frame out the focus groups that are going to follow, which is that next phase, right? So it doesn't stop. Those were kind of voices that kind of spanned what we thought to be kind of the spectrum. So that we can narrow down the deeper conversations for the focus groups.
Yeah. And I think our last slide here, do you want to flip to the last slide?
Okay, want to go?
Yeah.
More about the outreach process?
I think we're good. I think that was a pretty thorough description. So this is you. It's the board, like what came up for you? What do you want us to know?
Yeah, so why don't either of you have anything jump into mind off the bat? Alex, I'll extend that to you as well. I have a thought or two, but I'll let everyone else go first. My main thing is just about if we're going to be requiring at end of life requiring upgrading to electrics, those can tend to be pretty expensive. And so I know that there's pretty solid programs for like low income people to like help finance those things, but there's a pretty solid gap in the middle where you definitely don't make enough to afford the new one, but you make too much to get the aid
Right.
from a lot of financial services. And so finding some way to try and cover that gap, like I know a lot of my coworkers definitely fall in that category of making too much money to be on Medicare, but
Barely.
by like a couple $1,000s a year, and so definitely not having enough money to finance their own healthcare. And so haven't been to the doctor in a decade. Right, and like just a lot of people in that realm. So if it's a legal requirement, making sure to eliminate as much of that gap as possible would be a big concern of mine. That was the main thing that jumped out to me, and Alex, I saw a comment for you that disappeared before I could read it. Heather, you're
It was Alex, just asking to type any questions in the chat.
Great.
She can't hear them, so.
I think for Boulder, just to like kind of respond to that, you know, what we've really been exploring is this whole expansion of low to moderate income. And I think we focused a lot on the low income. We're like, I think we need to pull moderate income in because we know that this is exactly what the struggle is. It's like, I can't go out and buy a heat pump. I mean, I'm in the same boat. Like, I can't buy a heat pump tomorrow. So
Same
how
boys,
do
of
I
course,
get
we're in
there?
the same boat.
Right, so we've kind of expanded kind of our thinking around our incentives and programs now. You know, it might not be that like the incentive is like a full grant to a moderate income
right.
home, but but
Yeah.
you know, we're definitely looking at like, what can we do to incentivize that group more, because we know that's a struggle.
Yeah, and I would put it into those two buckets, right? It's the, you know, it's end of life, you have to make it an expense.
Right.
We have the first problem which is making that expense is hard,
Yes.
even for the like for like replacement.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we're asking you to convert, then there's that increment on top, and both of those need to be supported. I definitely hear that. That's, yeah, a very important point, very much on our
I mean,
mind.
the best solution is simply tax rich people, but in lieu of that solution. Sorry, I need to get in my obligatory anti.
No,
I was waiting for it.
I'm all for the socialist approach. I mean, I do say, you know, it's a very real problem. For those listening and for you to certainly share, I do think that there's some promising things. It's not solved for. On January 1st, Excel announced their substantially increased incentives.
Okay.
So if you do know folks who are looking to do heat pump adoption, effectively Excel's rebates tripled.
That's great to hear.
And then the city and county have launched their low to moderate income incentive, which can provide some additional gap. It obviously doesn't get you to the cost of replacement. We have a legislative initiative to do the on-bill repayment program so that you could at least have access to accessible financing that doesn't require all the, you know, the credit history or the home equity. So it's definitely very much a need and not solved for, but getting a little bit more promising.
And I think that's why in looking at kind of whole list of what we're considering in the engagement process and strategies, that I really emphasize the financial advising and the technical assistance, because like, you know, it's like, hey, I know I want to do this and what the heck's out there and how do I get there, you know, but if there was somebody to call that could say, okay, let's like walk you through where you're at and what's appropriate for you.
Yeah.
So you can see, oh, I can see the vision now of how I could get there.
Absolutely. Cool.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that was the main thing that sort of jumped out to me. Just there are so many people that fall through the gaps in our decaying late stage capitalism. And trying to find ways to help.
Does Pace do some of this already? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and EnergySmartYes.com is our residential advisors. Who are there to kind of help walk through some of these incentives, at least, you know, for Boulder and.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we continue to partner with the county through Energy Smart for resident, as Laura said, and PACE for commercial. And they're both out of the same office, so people don't get bounced around if they end up at the wrong place. It's all good. But I mean, I think there's still a broad need, and I think we, are continuously welcoming feedback on how to reach the harder to reach people who don't necessarily know about that. I mean, these programs have long served people, with a little bit more of the financial capacity and wherewithal to undertake the upgrades, and we're always trying to do more outreach into areas that we think have been underserved, and are certainly starting to reach more people, but I definitely welcome any good resources and getting the word out to folks about the programs.
How do you work with installers? So like I had someone over to do something and I just asked for fun, like, oh, how much would be the switch to a heat pump? And they're like, oh, that wouldn't work for you. I'm like, I know it would. And so seems like
It's the perpetual challenge. I mean, there's a number of things that are going on.
But is that part of?
I do think that it's, certainly a contractor education, contractor outreach, workforce development, are key. I also think that there's the vast amounts of money that are starting to flow will also help us with this issue, right? So traditionally, it's harder to sell, they have less confidence. But, if somebody's got access to, $6,000-8,000 incentive, you don't quite get away with that same conversation anymore. But it remains an issue, absolutely.
Yeah.
We certainly recommend that folks go through our Energy Smart program to get advice back, right? So if you're getting that kind of feedback from contractors, you can talk with one of our advisors, and they can kind of say, well, you might want to talk to get another quote, or
Right.
here are some additional questions you can ask, to get clarity on why it's not a good solution. But it's still a challenge for sure.
And I've got a question from Alex. Are there any other communities pursuing this similar initiative? And do they have technical knowledge or connections that can help fill the technical assistance category?
Yeah, I mean, Laura, you want to talk a little bit about the partnership we have with the Energy Office and the grant you mentioned? but
Sure.
to kind of expand a little bit on that.
Sure, so I mean, we do have the benefit of like maybe not going first on at least something like a building performance standard, so the state and Denver are a year out already in the implementation of their program, so they've really started to kind of structure the technical assistance piece, and they have got newsletters and trainings, and they have like actual like call-in lines. So the actual equity priority buildings program was the way that I've defined it, and kind of I'm working in this larger Department of Energy grant with the state and with Denver not Denver, with Aspen and Fort Collins, was kind of based on what the city of Denver was doing. So for sure, we're looking at what others have done and looking at how it's working and how it's not working, so that we can, not
Learn
rewrite the
from
book.
and
Yeah.
lean in, learn from and lean in. And I also think, there's certainly been some other roadmaps out there. We never really published a broad roadmap, but we've certainly had our internal working roadmap. So this is like a refresh of that. But there's, a lot of what we've been able to do with our consultants is kind of get a scan of some of those best practices and where some of those good example programs are that, have little nuances that can be beneficial to us. But I'm especially excited about the $20 million grant that we partnered on with the state, and as Laura mentioned, the $4.5 million that's coming to us to support our programs. I think is really representative of the opportunity to partner with other communities and better support through shared learnings and scale.
Is all the stuff you find from the consultants gonna be in the roadmap as like a back? Just for people who wanna learn from it?
Yeah, I think the format is something that we're still in conversation with, like it'll be like consultant reports or yeah, because I think we'll center the things we think are most suited, but yeah, I envision that we'll have available kind of the broader
Hmm,
consultant
Yeah, not for
report.
like the community.
Yeah. Mhm.
maybe like.
Those deep people who wanna click this link and go into it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd be-
You can really nerd out, even I did.
I have a couple of questions. So I think like my furnace is reaching like end of life soon in the next few years. And I think I would love to like upgrade to electric. The only thing that's giving me pause is like when, you know, cell cuts the power for 3 days. I can hook up, I've been looking into like hooking up a propane generator or even a natural gas generator. And just enough to run the fan and I have heating for like whatever, you know, 2-3 days. So it's nice to have a backup fuel source. So I guess what's the status? Do you guys know what the status of like the whole mess with Excel, getting power? What could be my backup fuel source, I guess, in case of an outage, if this, you know, I imagine it may get worse in the future if it's not restricted. So that'll be the only thing giving me pause. It's like I lose my backup.
Yeah, I'm,
Can I make one comment? while
yeah,
you're
please.
thinking? So my one comment is like, we have all the fires happening in Los Angeles right now.
Mhm.
I think this is just a pure comment, they did do, public service power shutoffs out there. And they also, like, I just happened to, somebody tagged me on, social media trying to figure out if I was okay. They somehow thought I was living in California. But it was on this fire, like, safety thing, and they were talking about how many explosions there were from the gas. So it's just like an interesting thing as you look at that. Like, I was thinking like, gosh, like, because we do have these for the option, one of the options that is less expensive is not doing an all electric heat pump, but having like the what backup fuel switching, what is it called?
Yeah, dual fuel.
Dual fuel, yeah. So there are options to back you up, but then it's interesting to think about the infrastructure and impacts and stuff. So I don't know.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I think I'll start with the state of our system that requires proactive shut off that extends for days is not the appropriate end state for an urban community like ours, right? The proactive shut off that Excel had to do is a reflection of the current state and risks associated with the system. There is a $2 billion plan being presented to the Public Utilities Commission right now as to the types of investments they would make to rapidly reduce their need to shut off power to large numbers of customers. Like, it's not going to be like, they're not going to do it tomorrow or next year, but the idea is that through sectionalizing, undergrounding, hardening the system, the need to shut it off proactively, it gets narrowed to just the most vulnerable areas, fewer customers that can be, you know, restored more quickly, limited, so that the system is hardened and able to withstand the temperature extremes. I mean, you certainly have events like active fire and those types of threats. You know, there's still going to be shutoffs and things because that's protecting first responders. You know, we saw, you know, with the Marshall Fire, everybody's gas had to get shut off as well. Again, that's to protect first responders. So I'm not going to talk about like when an emergency is going on, but just that proactive, it's windy. I think it's notable. I wasn't down here in Boulder last Monday. It was certainly quite windy where I was. I think we can already see some of the results of some of the improvements, that there was no reported outages in our area during that wind event. So I think we're already starting to see some of the, you know, they did some feeder blitzes with what they call feeder blitzes to you know, address where like vegetation was impacting wires on some of the most vulnerable things, right? So I think Excel's making material steps to reduce the need to have what happened in April happen again. So that's the first thing I would say. And the second thing I would say is, certainly you need to make decisions for yourself as to your tolerance for being without power and what's acceptable. The average person, when we talk about low to moderate and middle income, aren't gonna have the ability to install backup generators. Like, I don't see that as the broad solution. It's not the ideal solution, and for most people, your gas furnace doesn't work when the power's out either. And that's the real state. And so I think if we want to be prepared for potential outages, I think we need to think about the breadth of community, and that means, understanding how to weatherize your home. If you have an extended outage, so you protect your pipes from freezing, having, a plan for where you can go if your home, you can't stay in your home because the temperature is too low. I think it's some of those resilience steps that certainly many in our community are used to doing and implementing, I think is where we want to resource. And then make sure that our electric system is reliable, because we need it to be for all sorts of reasons. It's not just to heat. We depend on it for traffic signals. We depend on it for hospitals. So I think we are hyper focused on making sure the right investments are made so that future state is not routine shut off of our power.
And just like an interesting point related to that, my neighborhood has never been shut off. Like I'm on an all electric house. It's been that way since 1979. It's all undergrounded. There's not any, it's not one they need to shut off. So I mean, that shows what the future state can look like.
My house always gets shut off. And what's worse, the people across the street have lights. So I'm always like, where's the fire? And the fire is gone.
What did you do to Excel to make them shut your
I
power?
don't know. I thought like, I mean, I don't know. I guess like the grid, whatever works. Like one side of the street is on one line, and the other side is the other.
Yeah, no, we definitely have some vulnerable areas.
So I had a very sad New Year's. Sort of like put a light on the I can't get it. I know, was eating dinner, and then it was across the street had lights, and it was like, cold.
I'm just sad. You and I need to talk so we make sure we put your neighborhood on our list of. No, I mean, seriously, we are working with Excel to try and look at where we're seeing abnormal outages. Like the average homeowner, won't remember the last outage they had if they ever had one. Like that's kind of the state it should be. Like if you talk, when I lived in Arvada, for Lakewood for years, it took a tornado, microburst, to take out power for extended periods of time. It took those types of events, and we definitely know we have some vulnerability here. Our infrastructure has been at an age where parts of the town, it's reached and it's starting to fail. We just need to, hear from community where those pockets are that it's occurring to make sure we can work with Excel to get solutions in place for those areas, which is, again, it takes time to do the broad. We have a lot of overhead lines that are in heavy vegetation areas, stress vegetation that run north, south, so are more vulnerable to wind loading, and that was the concern in April.
I think part of the problem is that Excel just needs to communicate.
Well, that, that's a whole different thing, yes, get me going. This is, we are definitely having a lot of conversations about the communication and making sure that that's clear. I make no promises, but we're working on that very robustly.
But I guess in the meantime, I think you mentioned hybrid solutions where it's like I could do a heat pump that runs 99% of the
Correct.
time on electricity. And then if I have an outage, it will just go to the backup.
You would still need to have a backup generator.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
To run the-
there's nice, wood stoves that will work in either situation, that folks can use, nice EPA certified, that do emissions control that are, if you really want to be resilient, I wouldn't rely on the gas. Personally, because it takes a really long time to restore a gas outage. It takes days because they have to go around and individually relight pilots. Once you depressurize a gas system, it's far harder than trying to restore electric power. And I was just reminded recently, during the Marshall Fire, all the way down to Alamosa, they actually had to have a power outage. So that they didn't use gas because of the depressurization of the system here in Boulder County. And the connection between that. So that tells you just how interrelated things are and the effects that you can have. And the gas system is particularly vulnerable because of its, it is a flammable gas, it's a pressurized gas and running through lines and.
All right, other questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the second thing for the technical assistance, have you guys looked into chatbots or thought about chatbots? Like, I mean, I know I sound like a tech bro, but I have seen the workflows of a lot of people in different industries, colleagues of mine, change a lot in the last few months, like a lot, to the point where it's like, I don't know. I mean, personally, I went from Googling 100% to Googling 5%. And I don't know, like it's just, I've been using it, and work for the national lab, so we deal with like really niche stuff. And at least the OpenAI one, it knows a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, I, if you don't mind, I'll answer that with what I've observed with, we have one of those already for our permitting.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just kind of playing with it the other day because I was trying to
already know.
support, like trying to get an answer on a topic. And so I tried 5 different ways to ask something and it was so off. So I think potentially, yeah, like I think it just has to be like, yeah, it's like, how is it getting informed,
The training.
The training.
There are definitely people out there working on AI and certainly like if you look at companies like Elephant Energy and Helio Homes and Energy Sage, like some of those, they've certainly used not necessarily chatbots, but a lot of sophisticated behind the scenes like modeling to help solution people, right? So there's virtual audits of homes now that can help you properly size equipment. Those are in play today that, I think saves cost, saves time, makes it a little bit more accessible. For some people, like you're more willing to maybe get an assessment and an audit when nobody has to come to your home. And if it's an accurate one that gives you a pretty good, and you get quotes with it, it's helpful. So I do see the technology evolution starting to inform this for sure.
And I could see like for, single family residential, that could be valuable, but when you get into large commercial, it's like there's so many like moving parts and pieces in terms of, how to get from point A to point B on an upgrade that it seems like you'd need maybe a consultant,
Oh, you would need a consultant.
Yeah, it's like that's a way more complicated, but
yeah, I
But if
think,
you already have the data, like the building codes.
Yeah.
You can generate you can use the bot to generate the data to train a new bot. If that makes sense.
But maybe it's more like I assume you're gonna partner with Health Energy and people who are.
Yeah, National Labs and others for sure.
Not reinventing them.
Yeah. Jonathan?
No, I just. No, go ahead. Follow rules of decorum and wait for.
Go ahead.
To go.
Go
Thank you.
ahead.
I appreciate the question, and one thing I wanted to bring into the conversation is that we're doing a little bit of an evaluation of the environmental paradox of AI. Obviously, it has great benefit with respect to modeling, forecasting, but at the same time, I think we know, and we've been hearing a lot from some council members about the energy and water consumption and resource issue. The city's in the process right now of developing an AI policy. So we're finalizing that in the next couple of months to really understand how it can and should be used. Obviously, for transparency, for accessibility, those are really good things. And so we're just trying to balance a lot of the issues that come forward. Yeah.
so when I was poking at that permitting chatbot the other day, like how much water did I waste?
40 questions in ChatGPT is 2 cups of water.
Oh,
fun.
That's the rule. At least that's what ChatGPT.
those have never been known to be untrue.
No, and again, I just, that's the, because I think there's a great benefit in terms of accessibility, just trying to balance a lot of the potential trends. That's why I think there are a lot of cities that are starting to look at some broader policy frameworks. And cities that's doing some evaluation to see what cities are doing and what we should do.
I think what I like about the chatbots is like, if you don't understand something, you can ask it to explain it in simpler terms. And then if you don't understand again, okay, like simpler terms. And it's really good at
Dumbing it down.
Yeah. Like, until it's like, oh, okay, now it clicks, like, so it's like if you're having permitting issues or something, and assuming the model is well trained, like it has enough data and it knows, it has the data to answer the questions, it's like, okay, you know, if a person's having issues, they could keep asking questions until they somewhat understand.
Oh, there is.
Yeah.
That's great. Back in.
I'm saving you the stars.
Thank you.
So yeah, I don't know, I just wanted to throw that out there because,
Yeah, and I think our current advising, like, at least from what I've noticed in the 4 or 5, almost 5 years I've been here, is that it's very labor intensive, you know, providing kind of hands-on advising to an individual to get them from one point to another, you know, depending on the person, it can take a lot, you know, and I think we're always like struggling to kind of keep up with having enough advising capacity.
yeah.
So if there's a way to kind of like blend the two, maybe.
I would also like to state for the record, the child of and grew up around computer programming people, that's not artificial intelligence, but it's just sophisticated machine learning. Entirely side note, but I think that there's value to be had, but things get really hairy around the companies that are providing said AI and the ways that they're doing it. And if we have learned anything at this point, it's that you can't trust a fucking corporation to be honest about the resources that it's using, to be honest about where it's getting all of these things from, and like to be using ethical resources in training their models and like doing any of it ethically. You can't trust a fucking corporation to do any of it ethically. And so
I don't know, I mean, sure, but I think the technology is here to stay. I mean, my 65-year-old mother has started using ChatGPT and she uses it every day now. Like for her, she teaches Spanish online and she's getting like lessons made through that, conversation topics. Like my wife is an artist, I started using it as well for like ideas and art concepts. Her friend who is like a little bit of a Luddite is using it now, like it's just expanding. We just got like our own OpenAI chatbot at work to make sure like things don't leak from the lab. I don't know, I'm just saying
I'm
like,
a child of the Terminator era, so I just live in.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it doesn't have value and it's not here to stay. I'm just saying that we need to be, I think, careful, and as Jonathan mentioned, the city's erecting a policy around it, but we need to be very careful in how we engage with it and how, like, especially because like as a private citizen, however you engage with it is your own personal business. As a public entity, engaging with things has a connotation around endorsements and supporting of policy and such. So I'm just advising caution. Yeah, Jonathan?
Thanks. It just occurs to me that if this is a topic that the board wants to dive into a little bit more with respect to the policy, environmental applications and issues, maybe that's a conversation we can have. I just wanted to make sure, bringing it back to kind of the roadmap piece. If there are additional questions, I just want to give our staff an opportunity to go home if they would like to go home or come to stay.
Thank you for refocusing. So I will,
It's okay.
I will again put it out. Any further questions?
Well, I just, I imagine you do this, but I'd love to get the questionnaire whenever it's. And then if you need help finding people for the focus groups or anything like that, let us know. I can imagine your consultants with that.
Yeah, we're working on it. It's gonna be a heavy push is like kind of what we realized. If it's 20 people times 8 slots, and then trying to have like all of the various, the 20 different representations,
yes.
it's gonna be hard, so.
We may take
I
you up
might
on
take you up
that.
But we do like to have some ringers, you know, like, oh, they'll definitely show up. So
Yes, right.
that would be you.
Yeah, I run an event, a lot of people on the list that I'm happy to send.
Cool.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Yeah, and in particular, I think getting the word out about our questionnaire when it's up as well, I think would be really helpful. And then definitely, as you hear, you know, as we start to get into community, obviously, we would anticipate that might foster some dialogue. So, you know, please, you know, with your connections in the community, if you're hearing things, let us know as well and help us get that feedback. That's one of the reasons for being here tonight, is to know that we're about to talk to 20 times 8 and more people that and we know that, you know, as the game of telephone goes on, we'll have another conversation about coming after people's stoves.
Can't wait.
That's the building codes era, so it'll be okay.
You can take mine.
Yeah, definitely. Get rid of those gas stoves, but that's a different issue.
All right, are we feeling?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for presenting, and I look forward to seeing how this develops.
Thank you for your input.
And before we move on to the next thing, I'd like to acknowledge that I did feel like she is left. But Lynn Siegel did show up briefly.
Yes, I did see that and noticed, thought it was a little odd, we didn't have any public participants. Checked the website, noticed that the link was not there, so. Fix that in the meeting, so if you all would like to move public participation, if anyone joins, that would be reasonable.
Okay, thank you for that information, so. If public participants show up, we can go from there. Yeah, so it appears that Brent has already left, so. Our apologies, Lynn, the technical difficulties happen if you want. But we will continue to move then. Shall we discuss? Work chair, I believe is the next item on your agenda. Great. So my term as board chair is coming to an end. As much as it has been my joy. Yes. To serve as chair. This is my last chaired meeting. It does. So the way that we've done it as a board in the past is that the person with next seniority who has not previously served as chair is our next chair, which would be Alex, that would be you. As I have obviously served, you have already served. So I'd like to nominate Alex for chair.
Second,
Great.
if she wants to.
I mean,
do that.
you're welcome to not want to do it.
No, I'm happy to accept it with the caveat that there is a likelihood that I won't make the February meeting. So I may, but it is likely I won't.
Yeah, and thank you for putting that there. As I discussed, we had a discussion about this, that between the two of you who would most reasonably serve next, you have already had your twins. You have twins to be had.
Yeah, I'm not.
And we also have the both of us around to help. While you are still adjusting to new parenthood and having very small new people around to deal with. Myself for the next 2 months and Hanan is here for another year. So
Great.
there is resources around and available to help bridge that gap.
Yeah, and I think it wouldn't start until April, right? Don't use. Right.
Because typically board chair moves around starting in January. It's just that you became board chair because our previous chair, Mike Clements, left early in his term.
Yep.
And so then we anyways, ratcheted it back. So the intention was that starting to be back on a regular schedule of board chair passing starting this year. And then my term would end. I would have served 2 terms as a regular chairperson again. Or regular board person before I leave. Which is typically how it would go,
So how many months on your chair? Have you been chair?
like 10. Plus or minus, because it was like February, March or April that we switched over to me, and then it's January now, which doesn't feel real, but
Because the terms end when the new person is assigned, right, which is usually April.
yes, March will be my last meeting.
Yes, we could say like the chair begins in April for a whole year until next April.
That is also an option on the
Right.
table.
That way
I would-
it's a year.
I would like to throw it to our dear Mr. Cohen, that typically chair assignments happen independent of seat appointments, that those are 2 separate things.
They are
for
things. What I will say is this, the board has a lot of flexibility. However you want to manage the cadence of selecting and appointing new chairs. We've gone through a couple of different iterations over many, many years. And so I just want to put it out there that you have flexibility to change it up. The one thing that I want to acknowledge, though, is that in your charter, there is a requirement. It's one of the things that Heather and I were talking about that we have not been very good at in the past. When there is a change in chair position, we are supposed to hold a public hearing. So it's an official act of the board. Tonight, I just want to get a sense of when you want to do that, because we will put that on the agenda as a public hearing. We can talk about how to actually do that. It's very easy in terms of kind of the rules and decorum around that. But so my point there is that I think they are. We used to do it that way. In fact, that was one of the previous kind of cadences, is that as a new member would come on, we waited until the next meeting, and we would appoint the new chair. And so it just kind of kept things clean. There was this point of transition each year. But again, we had a group that didn't want to do it that way, and we kind of moved into this every 6 months. And so whatever you'd like to do, we can certainly help.
And question about that rules thing.
Yes.
Yeah, something. Is that required before the new chair takes office, for lack of a better word, or like where in the process does that public hearing fall?
So the public hearing is, the official act just means that you all are going to take a vote on who the new chair is and their tenure. They're going to
Yes.
serve 12 years, or excuse me, 12
12
months.
years.
Yeah, I like how I'm thinking. I even saw Alex like.
You'll have middle schoolers at
back
that
on
point.
that one. And so what would happen is there would be a motion, just like we did now, and then the chair would open it up to any public hearing. That means if there's any public attendees, they could speak on that very issue. If there is none, you close the public hearing, you take a vote, the new chair would be appointed.
Can we do it at our normal?
You can.
Okay.
Correct, sorry. So I would propose that that could be done at your February meeting, and you could defer if you wanted to vote and say that the new chairperson is not, and the new chair is not going to take effect until April, you can do that.
Okay,
But you can hold the vote, and you can do the public hearing at your February meeting.
great.
Because when are we expecting council to select new members?
They are doing their board appointments on March 20th.
Okay, so
So
April.
April will be the first meeting of the new board member.
Yeah. And
So I will say go back to the April to April. So
Sure. that works for me. And so at our February meeting, we will have our public hearing and then official vote on to who our next chair will be.
Yeah.
And then that will go into effect starting in April, would be the first meeting that the new chair would.
What about
Sure.
March? We just,
March would be a regular meeting where our old chair would, it would not be a public hearing, we would already have done that. It would be the last meeting of the old board.
Right.
Functioning under the current chair.
Oh, okay.
And then the next meeting would be the first meeting of the new board with the new chair.
That work for you, Alice?
Yes, that would work for me.
Wonderful. Okay, so at our next meeting, we will hold a publicly noticed public hearing. If any of the public wishes to join and give their opinion on who the next chair should be.
It's, as I said, it's not a process that we have typically followed on the EV. We were just looking at the bylaws and that was something that popped up.
Great.
And I think it makes sense for a lot of the quasi judicial
Yes.
boards, but there is consistency across the boards and it was written into all the bylaws.
That makes sense. So we will hold said public hearing at our next meeting. And then hold a vote to appoint our next chair to take official role in starting in on our April meeting, whatever. The first Wednesday of
Which
April
will be
is.
Alex.
Yes,
But
which will
spoiler alert,
almost certainly be our dear Alex, unless someone wishes to try and overthrow that. Gotta hedge your bets. I don't think it's gonna
Are
happen,
you
but
getting ideas?
like,
And
you
it's
gotta
not here,
go
so
for
you
another,
never know.
you gotta go for another appointment? No, I'd love to, but, all right. I think that concludes that discussion, unless anyone else has any comments, thoughts, questions, concerns. Nope, feeling good, feeling satisfied, feeling fulfilled? Cool. With that, old business updates.
I think that's me. Yes, it is me. I had to put on my little reading consistency. Thanks, board members. I thought it would be helpful just to create a little space to debrief our session with City Council on December 19th on the Climate Action Plan update. Mostly from the perspective of love to just give you all a sense of what we heard as staff during that presentation. And obviously there was a strong connection between the board and that presentation. And I was there, you presented as a member of the public, but you were there and.
Well, I didn't watch the whole meeting, to be honest.
What?
I had a toddler.
I'm so hurt.
I watched the recording.
But then also to give Hernan an opportunity to share his thoughts. And if you had not watched the session, I would just say Hernan did a fabulous job representing the board's feedback. And it was a really, I think, well executed opportunity to have the board there in person. There were a number of questions that Hernan can elaborate on if you'd like to. So generally speaking, there were no real surprises. I think we had talked to the board previously about what the update consisted of and how we were going forward to represent what was being updated. But I think that all went incredibly smoothly. Again, this was not it wasn't a decision point for council. It was just a check-in with them to let them know what our plan was and if there were additional items or ideas or thoughts that they had on that plan. That was an opportunity just to do that pulse check with council. A couple of the larger items I think that came up that I was really grateful to hear council's perspective. One being one that really started to gel the week before and certainly was something that you all had considered, and that really had to do with compact land use and transit-oriented development. It was one of the questions and comments that you all brought up at the session previously around the role that the CAP is playing in thinking about land use, how the IPCC and their recommendations really kind of feeding into how we are thinking about that body of work, and then how that translates and connects into other more planning specific plans like the Boulder Valley Comp Plan as an example. And so Councilmember Schuhard sent out some hotline questions the week before asking how staff was really thinking about land use issues and the IPCC's recommendations with relation to climate. And so we developed a response on hotline. If you all didn't see that, I'm happy to forward that out. But I think it created a good, solid starting point for the conversation with council in that particular area during the session that we had on the 19th. I want to back up and just say that if you were watching Enernon, I think you arrived a little bit later. It was a tough evening overall. There was a lot of disruption taking place in chambers that night. And I bring that up because it always is difficult as staff to kind of get centered and make sure that we're showing up as our best selves and presenting what we need to present. And vice versa, it's very difficult for council members who were obviously rattled by the disruption and the protesters that evening, and we had to, council had to call a recess. And so I just point that out, is that those are challenging circumstances. And so if you were watching the session and wondering why we came on a little bit late, and knowing, or if you felt that there was something a little bit odd because there was no audience, I just wanted to point out that that was what was going on behind the cameras if you didn't see it. So land use was certainly a topic that was brought into the conversation. We knew from previous conversations with a few council members that they were very interested in thinking about the connection to some of the other areas that have not been central and traditionally included in the CAP. We talked to you about this at our session previously. Things like water as an example, and really starting to think about other aspects. And that was really, I think, the exciting update to council about that cross-departmental mapping and really looking at the plans that currently exist and how we're starting to really connect to those. Council, I think, was very appreciative. They really liked that idea, mostly because they're really looking for all departments to really step into their space around climate and resilience. And I think that's a really positive thing. So we heard some comments about how each department is really starting to show up in that regard. The other comments that we heard that I wanted to highlight back, there was a little bit of discussion, I think, prompted by one of your colleagues here around the connection to food. And so there was some response to that, which was really good. And then the connection that was drawn in some of our mapping to mental health and kind of social issues that have not been central to our climate work previously. And so thinking about not just with respect to climate anxiety, but how climate change and climate disruption really does connect to a lot of the other social issues that we're trying to solve at the local level. And so there was comment back about from at least one council member that they really liked that connection. And then the last comment, which has got us thinking a little bit differently about some of the potential risks that we've been mapping and identifying, really came from one council member's comments about financial risk. And it was, I believe, something that you all talked about when we spoke with you in December as well. I think it came up with respect to underinsured or uninsured community members. I'm looking at you. We had a really robust conversation and it was really helpful. And one of the council members, I think, had picked up on that and started to kind of get into a conversation with us about how are we thinking about that moving forward? How does it show up in the CAP? And then how does it show up with respect to what I like to describe as like the financial headwind related to climate disruption that we haven't necessarily mapped in a holistic way across the organization. So that gave us the thought to kind of move into that space a little bit too. So before I'd love to hear Hernan, you talk a little bit about your experience, if there's anything you want to share at all. But as far as next steps, we're taking that feedback from council, really starting to map that into our plan, our trajectory to get to kind of the rewrite of the CAP. And so adding in some new call outs, adding in some new dimensions, some new connection points. Right now we're in that drafting phase. So we're starting to pull all of that together and likely be coming back to the board with a more solid draft in the next couple of months. The other thing that we'll be doing is, if you recall, we had hoped to go back to council to update some of our targets related to resilience and equity, kind of putting them at the the same level as some of our mitigation targets. And so one of the conversations that we had with council is what's the best way to do that, whether it should be by resolution. We don't like to govern by resolution. I understand that, but those targets were adopted by resolution originally, so it makes sense to us to go back and just update that. But council did have some comment on, we're going to be in the situation again that we're always going to be kind of coming back and checking in on progress and updating where we're headed and the tools and targets. So what's the best and most flexible way to do that? And maybe it's not resolutions, so we're looking and evaluating some of those options, but at least for this next update, our plan is to go back with an updated resolution. So I'll stop there. Would love to field any questions, any comments. If you watched the session, if anything came up for you, but Aaron, I'd just love to give you a little bit of space to share your experience too, anything you heard.
I think overall the feedback was positive.
Mhm.
I will say, I think there was some confusion with the memo from our board. I don't know if you saw that.
Oh, yeah, I guess I don't really know what they ended up getting. But they got the update from you in person.
Yeah, but there was some initial confusion there, like a little pushback. Because basically I think what we ended up putting in the memo was the overall discussion we had and like a multitude of ideas.
Yeah.
But I think there was some confusion as to whether it was like a unanimous set of suggestions rather than just different ideas.
Right.
I don't know, there was a little, that part was a bit confusing, so maybe next time we need to tailor that a little bit or make more specific, like what the memo from us represents.
Well, I can see very much like, these are the things we discussed. This is what we recommend. Of like
Yeah.
breaking into those two segments of like, these thoughts and ideas and topics came up as we discussed them. Here were some of the conclusions that we came to, just to like try and split that up, but continue.
Yeah. So that will be my only recommendation moving forward. There were some comments I know about human behavior and how we're taking into account that into the plan. I remember we had this discussion like years ago where human behavior was part of the old approach and that kind of wasn't working. People were not changing their behavior, so we kind of moved into system changes to kind of try to like incentivize those behaviors instead of telling people to do something. More like more of an indirect approach. So I don't know, it seems like there's something that we're not doing anymore, so.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that. That was, and I kind of forgotten about that piece. And so, yeah, there was a comment around how can we continue to really direct our efforts to changing individual behaviors to take advantage of the programs and services and and I think the way we discussed it with council is yes, but again, we're not going to deal with this with climate disruption by changing light bulbs. So the idea is, yes, we want to continue to support individual behavior change and opportunities because we all want to do something, but at the same time, it's more powerful when done in a collective way, and then identifying how does that help us in terms of changing the systems.
And I think your answer reflected that. I remember you mentioned system change, and I think so that's something I noticed that caught my attention. The line item budget ask, I thought that was like, I don't know how you guys want to address that, but I don't know, I don't think that's feasible, right? Like I don't that I guess it seems to be, I don't know, like from the council discussion, it seemed like I guess it's how you define plan. I think to me, the document is more of a general strategy, roadmap, and to other people, a plan is like a specific plan with step-by-steps. So that kind of difference in views of the plan, it seemed like some people were like reacting differently. So I mean, I'm just telling you what I noticed. I guess I'm not saying
That's helpful.
but yeah, I mean, like I think line item budget does not. I think when you were presenting to us, you know, what, 2 months ago or 1 month ago, I remember. I think we talked about funding, and you mentioned like the goal of the plan is to have everything in place. So if like a grant comes along or a program comes along, we can like tackle, get it and get the money and fund the projects. At least that's how I understood it, rather than, oh, we have, the city has this budget, so we're gonna allocate this. Like, it's more like, it seemed to me it was more like as things come along, take advantage of them, like the Dr. Koch grant. That's something that kind of came along through was it the infrastructure bill? I'm not sure, like, so yeah, so that part is like, maybe clarify for council, like this is not the kind of plan that has like line item budgets. It's more like a strategy where, as things come along, we seize the opportunity because we have these goals that we have set for the department and the city. So that seemed like that was a bit of confusion. I remember there was some pushback on the IPCC that kind of surprised me. But they wanted to like, study other sources as well. And I think those were the only, like, the main things that kind of jump at me. I mean, I think I agree with you, the overall, the feedback was good. And these are the only things that kind of, I noticed, I guess. Yeah, these are what you guys said.
So 2 quick responses to that. I appreciate you flagging the question about what you described as the line item. The request was the council member wanted to see actionable strategies and the associated funding for each.
Yeah.
And so as a team, we started talking about what does that look like? And it's not necessarily taking our budget that we have related to the department and start to say, okay, we're gonna line item, like, here are the actionable strategies. We kind of do that, but that's internal facing. It's a little bit of the work plan that we do. But it did give us an opportunity to start thinking about what's really behind that question and how do we start thinking across the organization and how do we do our budgeting? How are we thinking about the impacts? So yesterday we had a really, I think, robust conversation to say, we know that there are going to be additional costs associated with climate disruption. How are we thinking about that in the future, more on the resilience side of things, and how are departments starting to orient in terms of making investments today that will help us avoid some of those bigger ticket items later on. So thinking more on that resilience side of things. So yeah, what you said, I think, is right. We tried that back in 2009 and 2010, where we had a list of here's each of the programs and here's the dollar amount. And then it just begs the question, why that amount and not that amount? And then you get into this like cost per ton. And it's all around deemed savings. So we put money into strategies that support kind of a crosscut of objectives, mitigation, resilience, equity. And so it's not just like metric tons of carbon.
Yeah.
So thinking about there are programs that take time to mature. So you need to invest in them now, knowing that we're going to see savings later on. So it's not a simple exercise of accounting to say, most actionable strategies. We know where the money goes. We know how we invest our dollars. We've been at this a while. And so I think we're going to have some conversation with that council member just to better understand what he is looking for. But I agree with you, going back to your comment, the cap is not the place to have that listed. That's more of an internal facing thing to understand how we're resourcing the various strategies.
But I imagine too, like some of these system changes, I mean, the funding will be external, right? Like that Dr. Koch grant, was it 200 million? That was external. That's like a big system change, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
but you cannot account for that, I guess, because it comes, if it comes, you get it. If it doesn't.
Right.
Yeah, and I think I would put a few flavors on it, because I appreciate where Councilmember Wallach is coming from in this challenge, right? We know that climate change and the disruption and the risks that come with that, whether it's, enhanced wildfire mitigation that we're doing today, we know we aren't doing enough as much as we could. We know that there's going to be strain on our water utilities in different ways, right? We know the cost of floods, those types of things. And I think he's just, acknowledging that if we know there's going to be a cost to the city to respond to that, like trying to get a handle on that because we're in the midst of discussing, you know, how to resource things. So there's very much that piece. But I also think, to your point, we also need to be cautious about implying the city's taking on the cost of everything that needs to happen, right? And so like we talk about the roadmap and the $1 billion number, it's not our intention that we're gonna stand up a $1 billion rebate program to help people make that transition, right? We just need to quantify and tell the story of like how it can happen and you know, what that saving, you know, what that cost avoids in terms of future costs and the things to find out what the right tolerance is for investment. So there's a lot more narrative that has to happen, but I think he's appropriately recognizing that, you know, when you have what's the number of fire days and, you know, 10-fold increase in drought days and temperature days over 100, like there's a cost associated with that. There's things we as a city organization are gonna have to invest in as a response to that and trying to understand what that is and what the trade-off's gonna be in terms of other things the city needs to fund, you know. Not, I saw Ally here, so for some reason rec centers are in on my mind, right? Is it the, you know, the top of the line elite swimming pool? Or is it shoring up that building to future utility costs because of the magnitude of climate impacts? Like there's gonna be trade-offs that happen in that discussion and we need to get savvier about how to inform that trade-off discussion, right? Because we can't do everything. We're gonna put the pool in just for.
So, again, just wanted to offer if there were any kind of follow-up questions, anything that you saw or heard that you were concerned about or us to follow up on. Well, again, thank you for your willingness to provide feedback. And I just want to acknowledge we can do a better job at recognizing kind of the challenge that you identified in terms of your feedback. And so we can do better at trying to articulate, here's what you talked about, and here's the specific recommendations. So
I think that's fine, yeah, like, I was able to clarify.
I do too.
Yeah. And it's a learning process, like we're working together as a team here to try and convey most accurately and most consistently and efficiently what we all think. What the outcome is, how whatever was brought before us changed over the course of our meeting, and it doesn't have to be perfect on first attempt. So. And I'm sure that we can work on being less.
It was really fun.
Yeah, I think that was good though. I did read the document and it was good. Really good.
Yeah. All right. So unless we have any other thoughts, questions, concerns on this, then I think we can move on to our next item. Discussing our 2025 letter to council.
This happens every year?
No, it doesn't. And that's why it's on the list. It has traditionally been every year that council asks for letters from their boards. If you remember, council has gone to this every other year retreat. And so this February 27th is their midterm check-in. So I just wanted to alert the board that we're not doing the traditional call for letters this year. The retreat committee is looking at ways to get feedback from boards and commissions, but it's not going to be that traditional letter. So I realized that normally we start that in December and we're already talking about it and trying to refine the parts and pieces at your January meeting. We didn't do that. I didn't really have the background of what was going to be going on. So I just want to let you know that we're not behind. We're totally.
Okay, sounds good.
That was a quick item, thank you.
Yeah,
You put it on there and nothing has to happen.
Yeah.
All right, and then board recruitment is still happening. When is the end line and the deadline for applications?
31st.
Great.
Do you know how many, whether we have any applicants so far? Do you guys?
I've not seen an update yet. We just got some scheduling messages about the interviews yesterday, but I don't think we'll see how many applicants we have for probably another couple of weeks.
Okay, cool. So we can check back in on that in February. At which point the applications will already be closed. So, if you have friends, family, neighbors, acquaintances, that would be good, let them know.
I may have some, you should talk to me.
That's a good point.
For some reason, I get lots of applicants for my advisory panel.
All right. And then just, do we want to do a quick council calendar look ahead? It's not on our agenda, but anything looking forward that,
Yeah, there are a number of things. And I think I'd like to maybe reserve a little bit more time. And we can talk about this in preparation for your February meeting, maybe just doing a little more look ahead. So rather than month to month, start to really calendar out some anchor points throughout the year, some things that we definitely know that the board wants to have conversation around, both in terms of things that we know are coming, but also some things that you brought up previously that you'd like to have some conversations.
sounds good.
Immediately, I would just say that midterm check-in, that
Yep.
one should be on your radar for February 27th. The one that we probably will be back at some point, we're not quite sure how we're gonna do it. We do have a study session coming up in March to talk about the Excel partnership.
Yes.
That's gonna be an important conversation. Again, not promising that we're gonna bring anything to the board in advance because we're still trying to sort out what that session is going to be looking like. There are a few other things on that back page that we've been tracking, and I am waiting to hear back from some colleagues. Remember, we still have some pending items. One being some redevelopment that's supposed to be coming back to you in the next probably month or two. And so I've not heard yet when that's gonna get covered. So I would anticipate a pretty full set of agendas, at least for the next 3 to 6 months.
Delightful. And yeah, we can check in on exactly how to work out a look ahead in the future. So I think the one thing that came up today that I think might be worth following up on and figuring out how that fits in is a longer, more thorough discussion about and that might want to wait until the city's AI policy has itself come to a further fruition.
Yeah.
But just putting that on the radar to come before the board at some point. I'll have to make sure I won't be here. Someone to hold my burn down the establishment torch for me.
You can ask it.
You could be that person on.
Oh, I could be, I could show up as a public attendee. I might do that. Rant for 3 minutes about, yeah, it'll
Step by step.
go on some extended 3-minute ramble like I've never done before. Anyways,
Real
yeah,
quick, I'm guessing February might be my last meeting for a little bit. If people want like a 5-minute update on some of the plant-based stuff, I'd be happy to do that very quickly at the next meeting.
cool, yeah.
Or I could send it by email, but
I think we can probably find some space in the agenda for that.
unfortunately, rather short.
Yeah,
But great.
yeah.
Sounds good.
You have plans. Coming up.
I was listening to your plans. Oh, those plans.
Yeah, though, yeah,
I have other plans too.
I believe you 100%.
I think others have plans.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Is it more than one?
Two, yes.
Yeah.
We had a
It's
pair of
they
twin,
that are-
a pair of twin pregnancies on the board at the same time.
That's just nuts.
Yeah, it seems statistically improbable.
Fishes.
Something in food.
Yeah, probably. When is your due date?
March tenth, maybe.
It's a good time of year to be born,
Is you March, baby?
14th.
Oh, nice.
Anyways, unless anyone has anything else. Holding space. Nope, feeling satisfied in that case. Our next meeting is going to be February the 5th, unless anyone has scheduling concerns, no holidays this time of year, so. First Wednesday of the month in February. Delightful. With that, I will make a motion to adjourn the meeting for the night.
Second.
All those in favor?
I.
Thank you. And that will conclude our January meeting. Welcome to 2025.
Thank you.